Asia's tourism industry, once the lifeline of bustling cities, island paradises, and cultural hotspots, is now facing a collapse unlike anything seen in decades. In 2025, millions of travelers are canceling trips, airlines are cutting routes, and hotels that were once fully booked are sitting nearly empty. For countries that rely heavily on tourism dollars, this crisis has become an economic earthquake. From Thailand's beaches to Bali's resorts, nations that built their economies around foreign visitors are now watching jobs vanish, businesses shutter, and government revenues shrink at alarming speed. Inflation, global conflicts, rising travel costs, and shifting consumer habits have all combined to trigger a collapse that could leave lasting scars across Asia. In this video, we'll count down the 7 Asian countries most at risk of economic collapse from the 2025 tourism crisis. And number 1 may shock you. 7. Thailand. Thailand, long known as the crown jewel of Asian tourism, is now facing one of its biggest economic threats in decades. Tourism has always been the backbone of Thailand's economy, contributing nearly 20% of its GDP and employing millions of workers. From the beaches of Phuket to the nightlife of Bangkok, international visitors kept the economy humming. But in 2025, Thailand is struggling with a collapse in foreign arrivals. Rising global airfares, inflation in Western countries, and weaker Chinese travel demand have left airports and resorts far quieter than before. Hoteliers report occupancy rates falling by 30 to 40%, while small businesses that depend on tourists, street vendors, tour guides, and taxi drivers are seeing incomes shrink to crisis levels. The government has tried to launch new visa programs and digital tourism campaigns, but the recovery has stalled. Chinese tourists, once Thailand's largest group of visitors, are traveling less due to economic slowdowns at home. European and American visitors, squeezed by inflation and high ticket prices, are choosing cheaper destinations or staying closer to home. The ripple effects are devastating. Airlines are cutting flights, luxury resorts are slashing rates, and many small guest houses are shutting down entirely. With fewer tourism dollars, Thailand faces growing budget shortfalls, weakening its ability to invest in infrastructure and social programs. For a nation where millions of families rely on tourism to survive, Thailand's downturn is more than a slowdown. It's a warning of how fragile an economy can become when one industry collapses. 6. Indonesia, Bali at the breaking point. Indonesia, and particularly its world-famous island of Bali, has long been a global tourism magnet. Millions of visitors poured in each year, making tourism a key pillar of the economy, contributing nearly 6% of Indonesia's GDP and supporting countless jobs in hospitality, transport, and entertainment. But in 2025, Bali and Indonesia as a whole are facing a severe tourism downturn. International arrivals have plummeted, with hotel occupancy rates down nearly 35% compared to pre-pandemic highs. Resorts that once charged premium prices are now offering deep discounts, yet still struggling to fill rooms. Airlines have reduced direct routes, citing weak demand and rising fuel costs, further isolating the island. The situation is worsened by global economic headwinds. Chinese tourists, who made up a huge share of Bali's visitors, are traveling far less due to financial struggles at home. European and Australian travelers, once a reliable market, are cutting back as inflation and airfare hikes make long-haul trips less affordable. The social impact is devastating. Local workers, drivers, guides, street vendors, and artisans are losing their livelihoods. Many small family-owned businesses that depended on steady tourism are closing permanently. Villages that once thrived on cultural tourism are now struggling with rising poverty and migration as younger workers leave for cities in search of jobs. The Indonesian government is trying to pivot by promoting digital nomad visas and ecotourism, but these efforts are too small to offset the collapse. Bali's struggles show how vulnerable even the most famous destinations can be when the global tourism engine stalls. If this crisis deepens, Indonesia could face not just an economic slowdown, but a social upheaval in one of its most tourism-dependent regions. 5. Maldives. The Maldives has always been marketed as a paradise. crystal clear waters, luxury villas, and honeymoon escapes that attracted high-spending tourists from around the globe. But in 2025, the country is confronting an alarming collapse in its tourism industry, one that threatens its entire economy. Tourism isn't just important in the Maldives, it's everything, making up nearly 30% of GDP and over 60% of foreign exchange earnings. This year, international arrivals have dropped sharply, down nearly 40% compared to pre-pandemic highs. Rising global airfares, inflation in Western nations, and weaker demand from China and India have left resorts half empty. For a country that relies almost entirely on luxury tourism, fewer wealthy travelers means devastating revenue losses. The crisis is amplified by the Maldives' fragile geography and rising costs. Imported goods, everything from food to fuel, are becoming more expensive due to global inflation. Resorts, already burdened with high operating costs, are now slashing staff and cutting wages just to survive. Many smaller guest houses on local islands have shut down entirely. The social impact is severe. Thousands of workers, many of them young, are being laid off, and with few other industries to absorb them, unemployment is rising fast. Families that depended on remittances from resort jobs are now struggling to make ends meet. The government has attempted to attract budget travelers and promote sustainability campaigns, but these efforts can't offset the sheer loss of high-value tourism. Without a strong recovery, the Maldives risks spiraling into a full-blown economic crisis, with growing debt and social unrest. For one of the world's most tourism-dependent nations, the 2025 downturn isn't just a financial hit, it's a fight for survival. 4. Cambodia. Home to the world-renowned Angkor Wat temples, once stood as one of Asia's fastest-growing tourism markets. Before the pandemic, the sector contributed nearly 13% of GDP and supported hundreds of thousands of jobs, particularly in Siem Reap, Phnom Penh, and coastal destinations like Sihanoukville. But in 2025, Cambodia's tourism industry is in serious decline, threatening its fragile economy. International arrivals have fallen steeply, with visitor numbers down more than 35% from pre-pandemic levels. Chinese tourists, who were once Cambodia's largest source of visitors, are traveling far less, leaving hotels, restaurants, and tour operators desperate for customers. Western travelers, too, are cutting back due to rising airfare costs, inflation, and increased competition from neighboring countries like Vietnam and Thailand. The situation is worsened by over-reliance on tourism hubs. Siem Reap, almost entirely dependent on Angkor Wat visitors, has seen businesses close at record speed. Hotels stand half empty, souvenir markets are quiet, and thousands of workers have been laid off. In Sihanoukville, failed casino projects and declining tourism have left a trail of unfinished buildings and abandoned businesses. Socially, the crisis is straining communities. Many young workers who once relied on tourism jobs are migrating to Thailand or Vietnam in search of income. Families who borrowed heavily to open guest houses or small restaurants are now drowning in debt. The Cambodian government has tried to diversify by promoting ecotourism and regional travel, but the scale of collapse has far outpaced recovery efforts. Without tourism dollars, Cambodia faces shrinking foreign exchange reserves, widening inequality, and political tension. For a nation so heavily tied to its iconic landmarks, Cambodia's downturn is a stark reminder of how fragile a tourism-dependent economy can be in a global slowdown. 3. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, with its pristine beaches, lush tea plantations, and historic cultural sites, has long been considered a gem of South Asian tourism. Before the pandemic, the industry contributed over 12% of GDP and employed hundreds of thousands. But in 2025, Sri Lanka's tourism sector is buckling under enormous strain, threatening to push the nation deeper into crisis. The island is still recovering from its economic meltdown in 2022, when foreign reserves dried up, fuel shortages crippled transport, and mass protests rocked the country. While tourism initially showed signs of revival, the momentum has collapsed. International arrivals have dropped by nearly 40% compared to 2019 levels, as global travelers remain wary of political instability inflation, and rising costs. Airfares to Sri Lanka have soared, pricing out many budget-conscious tourists. At the same time, competition from nearby destinations like the Maldives and India has diverted travelers elsewhere. Tour operators report drastically lower bookings, and hotels, especially in Colombo and the southern coast, are running at less than half capacity. The economic fallout is devastating. Thousands of small guest houses, family-run restaurants, and transport providers are shutting down. Youth unemployment is climbing as fewer jobs are available in tourism, forcing many to migrate abroad in search of work. The government, already burdened with high debt, is struggling to provide relief. Social tensions are simmering once again as ordinary families, many of whom rely entirely on tourism, face rising poverty. For a country that once dreamed of making tourism its economic backbone, Sri Lanka is now staring at a painful reality. Without urgent recovery, its fragile economy could unravel even further. 2. Nepal, the land of the Himalayas and home to Mount Everest, has always been a magnet for adventurers, trekkers, and spiritual seekers. Tourism has been one of its most vital industries, contributing nearly 8% of GDP and sustaining hundreds of thousands of jobs across trekking lodges, guiding services, airlines, and small businesses. But in 2025, Nepal is facing a tourism collapse that could trigger an even deeper economic crisis. The first blow comes from the sharp drop in international arrivals, with visitor numbers down nearly 45% from 2019 levels. Rising global airfares have made long-haul trips to Kathmandu unaffordable for many, while geopolitical tensions in Asia have discouraged others from traveling. Chinese tourists, once Nepal's fastest-growing segment, have drastically reduced their visits due to financial struggles at home. On the ground, the impact is severe. Trekking routes in the Annapurna and Everest regions are reporting far fewer climbers. Tea houses and lodges, which depend on steady tourist traffic, are closing their doors. Local guides, porters, and small business owners are losing their livelihoods, leading to widespread unemployment in mountain regions that have few other opportunities. The Nepalese government has tried to diversify tourism with cultural campaigns and new trekking permits, but these efforts have failed to offset the decline. Worse, natural disasters, like floods and landslides worsened by climate change, have further disrupted travel and tarnished the country's reputation for safety. For a fragile economy already struggling with remittance dependence and limited industry, the collapse of tourism is a devastating blow. If this crisis deepens, Nepal risks a dangerous spiral of economic decline, migration, and political instability. 1. Philippines. The Philippines, a nation of over 7,000 islands, has built its global image on tropical beaches, vibrant festivals, and rich cultural heritage. Tourism has been one of its fastest-growing industries, contributing nearly 13% of GDP before the pandemic and providing millions of jobs in hotels, airlines, transport, and small businesses. But in 2025, the sector is collapsing, and the country is facing an economic storm. International arrivals have dropped nearly 40% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Rising airfare costs, global inflation, and weaker demand from key markets like China, Japan, and South Korea have hit hard. Many Western travelers once drawn to Palawan and Boracay are cutting back on long-haul trips due to economic uncertainty. The situation has been worsened by natural disasters and climate risks. Frequent typhoons, flooding, and rising sea levels have damaged coastal resorts and disrupted tourism infrastructure. Some international travel advisories have even warned against certain regions, further discouraging visitors. The economic impact is dire. Airlines are reducing routes, resorts are slashing staff, and thousands of small businesses that depended on foreign visitors are shutting down. In rural coastal communities where fishing and farming already struggle, tourism was the only reliable lifeline. Now it is vanishing. The government has attempted to pivot toward domestic tourism and digital nomad programs, but the gap left by lost international revenue is too wide. Without urgent recovery measures, the Philippines risks a downward spiral of job losses, rising poverty, and social unrest. As one of Asia's most tourism-dependent nations, the Philippines stands at the edge of a collapse that could reshape its economy for years to come. The 2025 tourism crisis is exposing just how fragile Asia's economies can be when they rely too heavily on one industry. From Thailand and Indonesia to the Maldives and the Philippines, nations that once thrived on millions of visitors are now facing job losses, shrinking revenues, and rising poverty. Airlines are cutting routes, hotels are closing, and families who built their lives around tourism are left without options. What happens next will shape the future of these countries for years. Some may recover with innovation and resilience, while others could slide deeper into collapse. Which of these countries do you think will bounce back first and which may never recover? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to like and subscribe.